a cohesive team. I thought that was a unicorn, a bit of an illusion.
Confusion is ugly, undermines teamwork and cohesion and kindness by its nature.
My first kick of the cat, if that's the phrase,
kick of the cat.
Was
yeah, I hope you don't
can.
kick the cat. Don't kick the cat. We're animal lovers.
Welcome to the Serious Playfulness podcast, where we explore the work of building healthy, mission-driven organizations that don't suck the life out of you. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Stephanie. And if you secretly dream of a workplace that you actually want to go to, then you're in the right place. Let's get to work.
Well, let's jump in, Andrew. So it's great to have you here on the podcast. And I wanted to interview you because starting with a very personal experience that I had with learning about your book and the model, which I think I conveyed to you when I met you in your office a few months ago, but I'll just share for the listeners. I was at the Napa conference, and I think you were the first thing on the schedule, as I recall, or the first main session. And I was, I think, to my shame, a few minutes late, rolled in, had no context, didn't know what to expect, and also carried a little bit of jadedness probably into hearing a talk in which someone's probably pitching a book, right? Just because of how life goes. And I slowly got interested, and then got very interested because of the nature of the model, the nature of the wisdom, and what was going on in my life, which is what I really want to talk to you about today, is the impact in people's lives that you're seeing, because I've also heard you talk about this, and it's very beautiful. For me, I'd come out of a period of mild depression in which I'd made things too complicated and too big. In other words, an area of weakness for me felt like a Mount Everest, which would inform thoughts of self-loathing, essentially. And I heard you talk about how the life of virtue, it's really helpful to break it down into the component parts. So for example, I'm just reading from your stuff. If you want to become more prudent or think you should, don't try to become prudent because it's too much, it's too big, but break it into its components and keep it small and repetitive. And hearing that message then was very encouraging for me at a time when I had complicated things, and it had great effects, because by perceiving the area of deficiency that I was struggling with as too big, I was disinclined to do anything about it, which just made everything worse. So it was a beautiful discovery at a beautiful time to hear your talk, which I first was not interested in, and I became very interested in. And I'm really grateful for it. And I've since been talking about the book everywhere, because I think that simple premise, or at least one of the premises of the book, as I understand it, it's that very thing, that keep it simple, keep it small, and just work it every day. And don't try things that are too big too early. It's a very simple thing. I remember when we talked about this in your office with Father Robert Gall, whom I also met at the conference, he said, this is kind of obvious, but there's something about how you've packaged it that, at least for me, was very significant. And let's go back to you. So how about this? Before we get into stories of impact, why did you write a book like this? How did you end up here?
So about 7 years ago, I was serving as the provost of our university. And people who know anything about academic life know that the job of provost is by far the worst on any campus, because you deal with all the problems. So you have all the deans of all the schools reporting to you, and you report to the president. So you're sort of the COO of the academic enterprise, but you deal with all the problems that the deans can't handle and the president doesn't want to touch, So it really is the place where joy goes to die, So I did that for 4 years. And after a while, it was feeling, I bet you most provosts feel this way, very frustrating that you think it's hard to get anything done, By the grace of God, I got a lot done, started some really great new programs on our campus, made some very important changes, updated our liberal arts curriculum for the first time in 40 years, 40. But nevertheless, it feels like you're constantly battling and hardly getting anything done. And I remember thinking, if I were to focus on my own personal growth, then even if I get nothing done, except just keep putting out fires all day, every day, I would still grow as a person, and that would have been a good time. It would not be a wasted 4 years, I'd always known about virtue, and I wanted to learn more, and I started to study more. And I've been teaching off St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa for years, and so I was familiar with it. But I went back in and took a closer look at the area called his Treatise on the Virtues. And that's when I had this huge aha, the framework, the idea that there isn't just a list of virtues, and depending on who you talk to, That list could be short or long, and some could be honest, but there is a definitive framework.
Right.
We know that these 50 virtues comprise everything about being a human, you know? I thought, my gosh, this is so needed, and so unknown. It's astonishing, I think partly because so much of it is hidden in plain sight. The word virtue for most people just means generically goodness. Be virtuous means be good, rather than acquire these particular, precise, specific habits of excellence that can improve different aspects of your life in tremendous ways.
Yes. It's amazing. And tell me about some of the impact that you're noticing in people who've read it. And to add a little more to my question, when I heard you at the book launch in Washington talk about some of this, about the effect on people crying as an example, it was very touching for me. And I almost put my hand up and interrupted you, which would have been rude to say, yeah, that was me. Because there's something in the human heart that I think before I let you answer the question, it seems like it gives a unique kind of practical, not just help, but hope. I'm wondering if that's part of it. But what are you noticing? What are some stories of impact?
So there are two things that people seem to attach to that I think together explain the power of the book. The first is this sort of simple on-ramp. Picking a problem you struggle with, say, depression, for example, or you struggle with getting stuff done, or you struggle with making friends, or whatever the struggle is, you find the virtue that's going to fix that for you, the super habit, the habit. And then you find within that just a very small thing that you're going to do differently every day.
Yes.
A small, manageable thing. The thing is, make it small enough that you can do it every day without killing yourself, because otherwise you drop off there a few days.
Yes.
And that will steadily get easier each day. And so then you can ratchet that up until that habit becomes part of you and it's no longer hard. And you go from having real difficulty making friends to doing it routinely. The sort of small parts, the baby steps, the way you can, the beginning is winning, as I phrase it in the book. So you're just getting started becomes manageable. And then you pair that up with the idea of what it means to be a virtuous person, to have these habits of excellence as part of you. Kind of the neuroplasticity in your brain means new pathways have been created in your brain so that these become part of your, become second nature for you. You become the kind of person that everyone wants to be. Matthew Kelly's phrase, the best version of yourself, is kind of overused now, but it is literally become the kind of person that other people want to be. And there's a passage I quote in the book from Captain Sully. I tell the story, as you know, about his heroic crash landing on the Hudson River in 2009. What a lot of people don't realize is, I remember at the time watching the news and going, oh, that's clever, couldn't land on the runway, land on the river. Good stuff, well done, I had no idea the vast majority of water landings by planes that aren't made to be seaplanes, and kill most of, not all of the people on the plane. And in fact, the air traffic controller who was working with him, so Sully said, I'm going to land on the river, can't talk to you anymore. And kind of that's it. The guy went into this huge funk and just had to sign off and go into the break room and cry because he thought, I just said the last words to this captain and, 180 people are going to die. He was in the room actually for a while and was one of the last to know about the successful landing. He was like, no, they all survived. It was tremendously unusual for that to happen. And all of that to say, the reason this happened is he had been developing the virtue of prudence, the super habit of practical wisdom for making wise decisions, making effective decisions, all of his life.
Yes.
Along with all the expertise of flying that he'd been developing. He'd been in the Air Force, he'd been flying since he was 15, I think. But he'd been developing that super habit and all its related super habits and virtues. And there's this beautiful line he gives in his autobiography that I quote in the book. He'd be walking on the streets or in an airport or something, and people would see him and recognize him and just start crying. And he says, at first I was puzzled by that. What is it? And then he gives his own explanation, thinks they're just sort of overwhelmed with the story, And I add to that explanation and I propose that, first of all, our world so desperately needs people of virtue. But what that looks like when you see it in action, particularly in a dramatic situation like the flight 1549 crash landing, is tremendous competence
Yes.
used in the service of others.
Yes.
We see lots of examples of competence in the Olympics, or in business and so on. But it's like my achievement,
Yes.
We also see lots of examples of people wanting to serve others, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But this combination of remarkable competence honed over decades of a lifetime, used directly in the service of others is so moving. We all want that. We all want that, And so the book says, okay, that's the goal, and that's how you can get there. And here are the little baby steps to get you there.
When I was a kid, I would, on occasion, fantasize about something happening in which I could rescue the Dame. Or when I'm in mass, sometimes I'll still do it. I'll think, I kind of wish someone would try to attack the priest so I can take him out. But so I think that's the masculine heart, wanting to defend and protect and do good in the service of others in a sort of heroic masculine way, obviously. The problem, though, Andrew, is if I were to try that, I am not prepared to do it. I have not studied martial arts or firearms for 25 years or whatever I might need to disarm safely and wisely that attacker, that assailant. But nonetheless, I can see in the Sully story, which is so beautiful. I watched the movie and loved it years ago and read it. So fascinating in the book. It's better in the book, I think, because it goes through the particulars and the timing. Unbelievable split-second decision-making. As you say, that was from a lifetime of virtue cultivation and practical training. That was not a fluke. You could not do that as a fluke. He would have killed everyone if he had.
Okay, no question.
And the movies sell us this fake vision of excellence sometimes, where you have the hero who just can do these outlandish things in dramatic situations that are just not realistic at all. But my goodness, it's such a beautiful story. Have you met him before? The pilot?
No, never met him. I did meet for the first time over LinkedIn, interestingly, one of the passengers.
Wow.
Yeah, and he agreed to be interviewed. So I interviewed him over Zoom, and I actually posted it on LinkedIn. I can give you a link to that.
I'd love to see that.
It's about a 10-minute interview. And what I wanted to know is when I wrote the book, it was all done on secondary sources. So I wanted to know, did I get it right?
Yes.
So it was a privilege. He read the chapter and he gave me 100%. He said, you got it right. And in fact, he started to tear up towards the end because it was just obviously reminding him of what he went through. Yes. But he said a beautiful thing. I asked him so that was now 2009. That was, 16 years ago. What, if any, are the lasting effects of that experience? And he said, I enjoy every single day that I'm alive because I'm so happy to be alive, and it was it's like, why do we have to go through a near-death experience today? Why don't you and I just live that way, So that was beautiful. It was nice to meet him and to hear from him. So
amazing. You're a marketing wonk. Is that a fair descriptor among other things? Among many?
No. I'm a professor of marketing, but I haven't taught marketing in a few years, unfortunately, because of my administrative duties. And when I teach now, I tend to focus on virtue in business. So, yeah.
The reason I mention or ask that is that the message that we are fed through many modern forms of marketing and advertising is not real. And that's an obvious thing to say, I recognize, but that which is excellent humanness or activity is often not realistic or fake or not based on truth, goodness, and beauty, which your book, obviously, it's in the tradition of the classical moral and other virtues. It's not just any neutral system, which I appreciate. And my point in going here is that we get a false view of human excellence if we just listen to the modern media and advertising, obviously.
Yep.
Either it's too easy or it's self-seeking, right? Or in my case, as an earnest, devout Catholic guy, I made it just too complicated. Pick the big thing and try to get good at the big thing. And none of these models lead to good things, to flourishing and to happiness. And we know this. And tell me about, you teach students, and I work with teams, and we work on healthy teamwork, et cetera. The nature of good teams depends very much so on the quality of the persons within those teams, obviously, which is why I love your stuff, because I don't do personal, individual virtue development work per se. but this is a fantastic tool for that. So thinking of, I guess it's two questions. With your students, how are you inviting them into this way of thinking and acting? And then any thoughts on applying this kind of model to teams and team development?
So for a number of years, in fact, for decades at Catholic U, we've been teaching the sort of having students read the traditional virtue texts from Aristotle in particular and Aquinas. So they know about virtue. But when we started the business school 12 years ago, we knew we wanted to help cultivate our students in virtue and be more explicit, more mindful about that. And so there, what we'd focus on is making sure that the faculty we hired were good role models. And then when we mentor the students, we would try to guide them for growth in virtue. But the latest horizon for us in this area, not sure I mentioned to you, but we won last summer, we received $1 million grant for this next phase. And the grant is to fund modification of our syllabi across a couple of hundred courses so that every single student at Catholic University at some point in their undergraduate, actually this coming year, everybody across the 4 years will be exposed at least once to an opportunity to practice growing in a virtue as part of their class.
Wow.
In what we call a double duty approach. So
Yes.
instead of saying, okay, now we're going to pause this class to talk about this virtue, we are going to integrate practice in a particular virtue. Maybe it's friendship for a team assignment, for example, or maybe it's orderliness for an accounting assignment, for example, to actually get them to experience practicing and growing in that virtue.
Yes.
Try something, a little thing that is difficult for you, try it again and again, and you just get better, And then the idea is they go, oh, wow, I didn't think I could do that. I did it. That means there are probably other things I could do as well. So that's in the academic area. For business teams, we're trying something new. As you know, we've been developing an app. And you heard it here first. In the next couple of weeks, hopefully we will be relaunching a much bigger version. We've been using a web-only version of the app. And so the Android and Apple version will be coming out very soon now. And the idea behind the app is every member of a team can make their own assessment of how they're doing on the different virtues. And then the team as a whole can generate an average across the team and agree on one area that they have in common that they could grow in and would benefit.
Excellent.
And then they dedicate, say, the next month, for example, the next 21 days to collectively keep working on a particular virtue. And we believe, and I'm hoping to gather the data, that will lead to improved employee engagement, improved employee well-being, and then ultimately to improved business results as well.
Yes. I love that. Having the collective accountability and encouragement can only help. It's fantastic. And to have it be, if you will, incarnated in how a team wants to get better, just adds another layer of motivation. And that's wonderful. Back to the stories. How did you select the stories you did? And other than the Sully crash landing story, what are a couple of them that you find the most interesting or meaningful, or that have proven to be maybe more impactful than others?
It was hard to choose them, but the idea was to illustrate in every case what virtue looks like, because each of the different virtues, you can define them, but you can't reduce them to a formula. So what you want to do is you want to show what this looks like in real life. One of my favorites was one of the last ones I wrote. It's in the final chapter of the book on the virtue of justice.
Right.
And it's the story of John Newton, this 18th century Englishman who started out in his early 20s as the captain of a slave trading ship. And horrific assignment. And funnily enough, had a conversion to Christianity, or reconversion. He was baptized but hadn't been practicing, but left the trade because he was getting sick. So not because of any kind of cognitive dissonance, but then starts to go through this sort of process of growth in the virtue of justice, as I explained in the book, and eventually becomes an Anglican minister. And then when he becomes older, he becomes a mentor to William Wilberforce. And together they become this real force towards the abolition of the slave trade. And the slave trade is abolished in the British Empire a few months before Newton dies. And so it's a great story. So Wilberforce experienced a conversion or kind of a deepening of his Christian faith and went to Newton and said, I'm thinking of becoming a minister like you. I'm thinking of giving up politics to become a minister like you. I look up to you. And Newton said, no. He says, we got enough priests. You need to stay in politics and be a good kind of moral inspiration in politics. And so Wilberforce did. And that one thing probably is what led to the abolition. But what was really fun about the story is there was a bit of a mystery to it. How does one go from being a slave trader to becoming an active abolitionist 50 years later? Like, how long does it take? And what are the stages you go through? And most biographies seem to suggest that it took him a long, long time to realize that what he had done was not a very nice thing to do, you know? But while I was writing the story, a new piece of research was published. So this is last summer by a professor in the UK. And there was an account of a slavery voyage, or a number of voyages, that was published as a criticism of the slave trade. It just described in great detail the horrors, the evils of it. But it was published anonymously, published in the US, but it was an account of an English source, anonymous. Nobody knew for a couple of hundred years who wrote it. But this scholar in England did a whole bunch of research, and by matching up the dates, times, size of the ship, number of enslaved people on the ship, proved, to my mind, beyond any doubt, that it was actually John Newton who wrote that as a young man shortly after giving up the business. So it kind of changes the whole trajectory of this evolution of his life to say, no, that was actually, he knew coming off that ship that what he was doing was really wrong, and started to sort of turn his life around much, much earlier. So that was fascinating serendipity, that the research came out just in time as I'm writing the book, you know, so.
And at the same time, to see that it's rarely a switch being flipped with acquiring these virtues and then acting on them. It can be an arc of many years and occasions, and where God and our conscience fits and all that is another interesting story, isn't it? But
well, no, you're exactly right, because the switch can flip instantly in your mind. But in terms of your habits and behaviors, that's what takes time. And this is very helpful for people who are in a situation where they know what I'm doing is wrong, or my situation isn't right. I don't know how to get out of it. The answer is take a little step, just a little step, and that'll lead to the next step. And rather than, because the alternative, as you were saying from your own experience, is you just freeze. Like,
yes,
I know I shouldn't be in this situation. I just don't know how to get out. You know, it's too overwhelming. Beginning is winning, right? So.
Yes. And, or you over spiritualize it and say, I'll pray and ask God for help. And when he helps me, I will do differently.
Right. Exactly.
Which I think his answer to your prayer is take a step with my help, and
exactly,
I will help you take more steps.
Take the first step and trust, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's fascinating. Your book doesn't talk, I don't recall, directly about, or even indirectly about spiritual warfare, about the battle for souls and minds, but it's absolutely a tool to that end, because it's helping us avoid evil and do good, and do it habitually and with joy. And
yeah, I explicitly wanted to write it to be accessible to anybody, regardless of interest in spiritual life or not. So, and I think nothing is lost from that, and it's entirely compatible with the spiritual perspectives.
Yes, makes sense. What was the experience of writing it like for you? Do you generally enjoy writing, and was this different than other efforts at writing that you've done in the past?
Like many writers, I have a love-hate relationship with writing. I do love it, and it's so satisfying to go back and read what I wrote a day or two before and go, yeah, this has achieved what I wanted to achieve. But sometimes in the moment, it's crucifying. You know, it just can be so hard where you just can't make the passages work, you know, but no, I do enjoy it very much on the whole, even allowing for that. A lot of credit to my wife, who was very encouraging. She gave up a week in Mexico, in Mujeres. We were supposed to go for a week's vacation. And she said to me, you're trying to get this book done. Why don't we just cancel the vacation and stay home and you can write? And she did a lot of the editing for me as well. So I still owe her that trip. I particularly enjoyed writing with her. So I would write. Another time, a good friend of mine is provost of Ave Maria University down in Florida. And he had said to me in passing one time, hey, we have a nice condo here. We need a quiet place to finish a book, you know, for a week or so. I kept that file away. It was last December. I really needed some concentrated time to finish up. And so we went, and Kath and I spent a week there in a beautiful condo. right on the plaza overlooking the church there in the center of Ave Maria. And I would finish a chapter, hand it to her. She would tear it apart. I'd move on to the next thing. And so we were really stuck at one point in a part of the structure of the book that wasn't quite working out. So we drove to Naples and walked on the beach for 3 hours and just talked it through and kind of had a breakthrough, really enjoyed that aspect of writing.
Yes. Sounds like you had a team writing de facto. Or
Yeah,
team.
pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, she is. I
Apparatus.
dedicated the book to her because it's very clear
Yes.
that it would not have been what it was without her. So
It's excellent. Last question or two. What do you hope happens through this effort in 1, 3, 5, 10 years?
my hope is that there'll be a renewal of interest in virtue, which I see happening already. There's this movement among the Stoics, those who follow the Stoics. But I think these are still niche movements. I want the general population to realize that we left something behind that's really, really important. That the notion that you can be anything you want to be as a human being, so you just have to sort of envision success and then go for it, is so deeply misguided that there is a blueprint for what a successful, happy life should look like. And it's the poster in the back of the book, that it just lays out the 50 specific super habits that roll up to the 4 cardinal virtues that for thousands of years people have known is the secret to human flourishing and happiness. And that there it is, the poster. Then, and that the contemporary social science is proving to be correct. They're waiting for anybody who wants a happy life. Here's the blueprint, just go live it, that. And then I also hope that businesses will see the financial benefit from it, which will then give them an incentive to encourage their employees to flourish, and then it's win-win. And some people worry that's kind of instrumental. I don't care. So long as people are flourishing, and then, in fact, I've seen scholarship that argues, I think correctly, that the super habits, the virtues are so beautiful to experience that even if you get into them for selfish, instrumental reasons, you start to discover, hey, it's really great to have practical wisdom. Even if I only did it because I want to make better decisions and be more successful, then you start to realize that it's a joy and a success in itself to be the kind of person who makes wise decisions,
Yes. And I think if I may add, from the Christian perspective, it illustrates that God is that good. He will take any effort in his direction and multiply that and do good with that.
Amen.
Because he loves us and he often has little to work with.
That'd be so true. Yeah.
Maybe one last question. You're working with your son, I believe. He's the CEO of some business entity. You can tell me what you wish, but what's it like working with him? Have you done that before? I'm curious about the father-son work collaboration. Just for last piece of context, I have a 19-year-old son that I could easily see working with me in a few years. And I'm curious.
Yeah. So it's funny. It's not the first time that I worked with one of my children. Several years ago, my eldest daughter, when she was 16 or 17, worked with me on a project basis on one of my earlier books. And she did a bunch of the work for that. So that was fun. But with my son, Dominic, who's CEO of Superhabits, Inc., it's the corporation that is venture capital funded and is developing the app, the Superhabits app. That's been a real treat. First of all, I talk to him a lot more often. He lives in Denver. We're in Virginia. So I talk to him a lot more often because we have business to talk about as well as personal, social stuff, family stuff. And it's fun to see when you raise a child and then they go off into the working world, how they're doing by sporadic bits of external feedback. Oh, they got a promotion, or they got a raise, or they got a new job, But it's just very sporadic and can come only every couple of years or so, But to see him and to see the way his mind works and to see his work products on a regular basis, it's really thrilling, It's just really thrilling. I will warn you, though, it's a little harder, too, because we are business colleagues and not just father and son. So I can't let my son is so thrilled. I just also have to give the feedback when the feedback is needed,
Yes.
And by the way, he's very comfortable doing the same to me. So that's somewhat humbling. You know, if you should have your son, yeah, that's not a good idea. That's for these reasons. You know, so yeah. So
maybe too comfortable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Well, son, but no,
We, as you may know, I had a chance to chat with him, and we enjoy getting to know him. It seems like he's an intelligent guy, and he's got a keen mind and knows how to do some interesting things. So I think it's a fantastic partnership. It's wonderful. I wish you well.
I'm very happy. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. It was good to talk to you, Dr. Andrew Abela. Thank you for your time and for the work, and I hope that the book and its wisdom and its helpfulness spreads far and wide.
Thank you.